Could the Minnesota Vikings and Cam Bynum be working on an extension? Well, of course they could, but are they? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. You'll make this thing go round. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL or download the app and use code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Today on the show, we got a little rumor, a little juicy nugget from Jeremy Fowler over at ESPN, who's, as a reporter, he reports more on the unconfirmed rumor beat, and that means that this is, still very much a long way to go. But he reported that the Vikings are, that they had extension talks with Cam Bynum last year, but nothing got done. And that that both sides are interested in giving that another crack this year and trying to get something done before free agency opens in mid-March. I love this news. I love Cam Bynum. I can talk more later on on what I like about Cam Bynum. Just like as a fan, though, how can you not love the guy? But as a player, too, there's a lot of value. And there's a reason that he's projected to get a pretty good chunk of change going into the future of his career. But before we get into all of that, let's just do the value thing. The safety position as a whole is looking to be a little bleak next year. It's like Josh Metellus and guys. It's like Theo Jackson is starting safety too. And I don't even know who you put in there if you want to do a 3 safety package, like as it stands right now, right? So like a lot of acquisitions need to happen to fill that room out, both the starters and the depth. And those acquisitions can be re-signings of guys who are scheduled to depart in Cam Bynum and Harrison Smith. We will talk about that room in more detail later in the show as well. For Bynum, there are a few options here. If a deal doesn't get done, but the Vikings want to force the issue, the tags are in play here. And I think that they're reasonable-ish deals. So the money is interesting. PFF has projected Cam Bynum to get $14.5 a year. That is precisely the Kyle Duggar contract. Kyle Duggar signed basically about the same contract, but for 4 years instead of 3 last year. So PFF is putting him below Kyle Duggar. I think that is probably a fair range to me. I did a thing about a week ago. I put it like a tier up. That's about 5.5% of the cap. I put it up to be like 7.5% of the cap, which was almost 20 million. So I was probably too high there. So let's go with the PFF number. Call it 14.5. And even without cap inflation. So this is a lesser deal than Kyle Duggar. Let's call it 15. Okay, let's do that. So 15.5. And another reason that I'm picking 15.5 is that the transition tag for safeties is about 15.5. The franchise tag for safeties is about 19.5. If you're unfamiliar, the difference between the two, the franchise tag, the true blue one, this is the non-exclusive franchise tag, and it's the one you probably see every time there's a headline about it, is it. It is a 1-year deal at that fixed price. That is that. There's no negotiating. No other teams can get involved. There's nothing. It's the simple one. They're slapping the tag on him and it's over. That's what you probably think of when you think of the tag. The transition tag, also known as the non-exclusive franchise tag, is the one you might remember from the Lamar Jackson saga when he was doing his deal with the Ravens a couple years ago, where it is a much lower deal. It's $4 million cheaper for Cam Bynum. And the catch is other teams can negotiate with Cam Bynum. Let's say another team swoops in and says, I will give you 20 mil. Cam Bynum, 20 mil a year, 4 years. You're going to take it. And Cam Bynum's like, heck yeah, I'm going to take it. That sounds great. The Vikings can say, isn't there someone you forgot to ask? And they can swoop in and say, actually, we're going to match that deal. If you drafted it up for us, thank you. We'll just give him that. And he can play on that contract, but with us. They have the option to do that. If the Vikings say no thank you to that contract, now you can have him for that price. That's too steep for us. The other team gives the Vikings 2 first-round picks. So it's really, really difficult to imagine a transition tag getting slapped on somebody and then another team giving them not only a deal that is higher than the market value that we've kind of established here for Cam Bynum, but also being willing to give up 2 first-round picks. I think you're perfectly 100% safe to use that transition tag on Cam Bynum if you want. I guess the problem is a bit more of it's a harder one to nail down, where if you put the transition tag on Cam Bynum, he makes his 15 mil, and then he gets to go around during like the window of opportunity for this, and he gets to ask, hey, what would you be willing to pay me? 16 mil, 17 mil, anything? And he gets to know his market. And it's a 1-year deal. So I think if you do the transition tag on Cam Bynum, for a bunch of reasons, you're really committing to letting that dude walk next year. You're not giving him a long-term deal. You're doing the transition tag because you wouldn't want to give him a long-term deal. So a long-term deal to me is still highly preferable to any of this tag nonsense, especially the one that lets him understand what his market value is and essentially say, great, now I know what everyone wants to pay me, and good luck to you getting me to come to the table with you, because I know that there's 3 other teams that I can get to bid against me. If he gets to know that much about the market, in a legal sense, I mean, honestly, agents know, right? And some of the agents that represent other safeties know what the market's like. So he's going to have some idea anyways. But the transition tag kind of lets you dip your toe in that, even if it is just sort of informally and just feeling things out. Nobody's really serious. It lets you really, really concretely entertain the idea of playing elsewhere. And it sends a giant signal to that player, hey, we value you, but not that much. We value you, but we are ready to replace you next year. I think that pretty much puts a due date on the relationship. And so you have to make the decision with Cam Bynum on what do you want the due date on this relationship to be? Do you want to have this be an Anthony Harris situation? It's funny because the top safety in the draft is a gopher again. Coming out, we're talking about franchise tagging a safety. Do you want it to be an Anthony Harris situation? Let's get one more year out of him. Or do you want it to be a Harrison Smith situation where he plays his whole career as a Viking, he becomes a legend in Minnesota, and he could run for state legislature and win in a landslide? Like, that's Harrison Smith, right? Like, he could be president of the world in Minnesota and everyone would be happy and throw rice at him. Like, it's great. Why did I make that romantic? That's the decision, right? And if both sides have been interested in working out an extension, then that tells me the decision has already sort of been made. We want to try to get a deal done first. Now, if Cam Bynum says, I want $25 million a year, and you go, okay, well, we can't freaking do that. Nobody's going to do that. Here's your tag, and we'll take the year we can get, and that's preferable to letting you walk right now. That might be how it goes down. The other thing to understand is, as I did when I did my little cap exercise last week, when I did give him, a way bigger deal than anybody else is talking about, I was still able to backload that thing and make his cap number. For example, the first year of the Kyle Duggar contract that I'm going to start really basing this off of now is his cap number in 2024 was $7.5 million. Most of that was prorated signing bonus. He had $2 million of guaranteed base salary, and then the rest of it was bonuses. His cap hit $15 million in 2025, and then it gets a little bit bigger in 26 and 27. I think doing something like that with Cam Bynum is fine. You don't need to backload like crazy, like the Saints are doing, or like the Vikings did, back in like the peak of Kirk Cousins' money. You don't have to do those tricks right now. You will later, and I think that that's fine. You'll put yourself in a situation where you have to start to do those tricks. But I think right now you can approach the cap where you're like, okay with putting yourself in a situation where you're going to have to put yourself in a situation where you're going to have to put yourself in a situation where you might have to cut a guy 5 years from now. Like, we're okay. We can go through some of those paces before it actually turns into a tangible problem. But while we're here, we can pay off some of the bill as it stands. We've got a lot of cap space, and we can make it so that those burdens down the road are a little bit easier. But that's a contract structure thing. If you have the luxury to do it, that's great. You have the luxury to do it. But also the Vikings have a lot of needs, including needs on the rest of that safety room. What is happening with Harrison Smith? Is he going to come back? If he does, how much are you going to get out of him at the ripe old age of 35? Is he still going to be that player? And, signs of slowing down and all that. Plus, hey, man, is this Cam Bynum dude even good? Should we even be talking about paying him, double-digit millions, or should we just let this go and pick somebody else? What about those options? Lots to get into here on Locked On Vikings. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. This is what taxes used to be: waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. All this anxiety over if you were going to get your taxes done right, if you were missing out on savings, if you were going to do them wrong and get in trouble. But now taxes means something totally different. It means matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today and give your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find every single deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. That is now taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only available in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Hey, guess what? Patreon's back. When you are done here, go over to my Patreon page. There's a breakdown of Caleb Johnson, running back from Iowa. I'm going to do a lot of running backs. So if you're interested in, is there a first-round running back? That's kind of the thing I'm starting with. The first-round running backs are going to be all over the place. Caleb Johnson's a name getting a lot of steam. I'm not sure if I'm there with everybody. But hey, let me go show my work. But we're not talking about that right now. We'll get to Caleb Johnson and draft stuff after free agency. We'll talk about it more. But right now we've got cap, we've got, pro scouting. We got a couple of months to kind of get all these other situations figured out. And the big situation in the safety room is a weird one because you might be losing two of your every down starters. Harrison Smith, Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum, these were every down players, more or less. I mean, Metellus would come off sometimes in certain nickel packages, but these were pretty every down. And they basically lived in big nickel instead of regular nickel because they just trusted Josh Metellus more than they trusted Shaq Griffin, who was the corner that would come off in two cornerback personnel packages. Metellus would only come off when they were in base with only 4 DBs. So that's one piece that you can at least say is solidly bolted to the ground. Great. Metellus, we've got Metellus and we know what he does. With Cam Bynum, whether he returns or not, you're going to have to get somebody to play that role. And that's really the thing that I think people need. This is the thing that always comes to my mind when I get pushback on paying a safety. Well, then who's going to be the safety? You're either paying him or are you going to draft a 5th rounder and start that guy? Did we like the Hussein Abdullah saga in the Robert Blanton world? Somebody's got to play that position. And so if it's not Cam Bynum, it could be a bunch of people, right? It could be Javon Holland. It could be Talanoa Hufanga. It could be Justin Reed. It could be Trevon Moehrig, Justin Simmons, Jeremy Chin. There are so many players. I actually really like the Jeremy Chin idea. Maybe I'm just super overreacting to the fact that he probably had his best game as a pro, very visibly to me against the Vikings when he got those back-to-back defensive touchdowns a couple years ago. But I do like the idea of a move around the field box safety in the Flores defense that at least a fit. But if you don't want to pay for Cam Bynum, you can go bargain bin and still get a guy that's probably reasonable. And that probably is going to depress Bynum's value a little bit. Maybe that's why these numbers are a little smaller than what I kind of think. But as with always, we'll see how it goes. And I'm not very confident in it at all. The people who make these numbers over the cap, specifically Brad Spielberg, they're 100 times better at this than me. So go with them, not me. But we'll see. But there are a lot of free agents. There's kind of Tyler Nubin, a couple of day 2 guys, and that feels like the extent of the safety draft class. So I think you're going with a veteran. I don't think you're going with a rookie for this. I just don't think it's the class for that in the draft. Necessary. I mean, somebody's getting Tyler Nubin, right? So maybe you are. But the flexibility is there to solve this problem however you want to. It's just you got to pick one of them. You have to do something. Whether it's a cheapo, whether it's it's Bynum and bringing back Harrison Smith for one last go around, whatever it is, you have to choose one of these ideas. Something will be chosen in March. We're not just going to roll in with, maybe they'll roll in with Theo Jackson as a starter and Blake Brandel this, but hopefully they learned a lesson from that. But hey, man, what's up? What's Harrison Smith doing? Obviously, the cards are going to be close to the chest, and we're not going to hear really a peep out of him for a while. I think most of the journalists who actually have the power to get an answer to this question are more professional and know better than to ask it. And I don't even know if an answer to that question exists right now. We could do all the body language analysis we want on Harrison Smith in the locker room after they lost against the Rams. But it's really hard for me to differentiate between sad because they lost in the playoffs and sad because my career might be ending. But Harrison Smith had a really great, heartfelt tribute to the other two safeties in that room in Bynum and Metellus, 24 and 44, he called them. This teary-eyed, just gushed about how great those guys are, how amazing it's been, to be teammates with them, how much fun this season has been. It's I don't know if he's mourning the season or a career. It means a lot to him, and you're in the moments right after it. I can't tell. And I don't think anybody can. I think if you think you can tell, you're just picking a coin flip. And if you called heads and it landed on heads, that doesn't mean you're good at coin flips. So for me, I prefer to just let that play out, and it's going to happen whenever it happens. Now, contract-wise, Harrison Smith's contract has a deadline on it on March 15th where it terminates and voids, and he becomes a free agent. So he could have also been mourning the end of his time with the Vikings. He could know that the Vikings are going to say, try to get a little younger and cheaper and go there. And, maybe they are going to replace him with a rookie, or maybe they are going to replace him with one of these maybe cheaper free agents. And he's going to go to some retirement tour, and we're going to get really weird pictures posted of him in a Tampa Bay Buccaneers uniform or whatever. And meanwhile, the Vikings go sign Elijah Molden and we move on from there. That could happen. And, emotionally, that would be very sad. I always like it when people play their whole career as a Viking, and it always felt like Harrison Smith was destined to do that. And I do think that if he does hit the market, I think that matters to him, just the consistency of it. And, he likes the people. If you bring back Cam Bynum and 24 and 44 are there again, I do think that helps it. Brian Flores saying that helps it. Hey, let's do this again. He knows it's good. He knows it's fun. And Harrison Smith, as we know, is a guy that doesn't like change. This is not a homer take about how great it is to play for the Vikings, even though we do have survey evidence that I think is the closest thing to an objective study we can get on that does rank them very high and the metrics that make players want to play there from the NFLPA. But it's more that if you know Harrison Smith, the way that the Minnesota market knows Harrison Smith, this is a guy that has not changed gyms since he was in high school. This guy drives the same car. This guy does not like change. This guy prefers consistency. He has a way of doing things, and that way has gotten him into credible Hall of Fame conversations. So, yeah, I don't know if this guy is going to be super into the idea of change just because someone's going to offer him $1 million more after he's made all this money in his career. I could see him coming back on the cheap. I really could. If he doesn't, my jaw won't hit the floor or anything. It's a business. I get it. But I could see it happening, especially if Bynum returns. But if you don't, and you do want to bring in your Elijah Molden for cheap and moneyball this, then there you go. But every time that guy messes up, makes a mental error because he's new to the scheme or whatever, you're going to think, man, this could have been the most polished vet in the world and probably wouldn't have been that much more expensive. I don't know. I do see a world where both these guys are back, but I was pretty pessimistic about Cam Bynum. But if they're trying to work on something, they're trying to work on something. It's just that there are a lot of cheaper options out there that the Vikings could go for. The question is, are they worse? So now let's actually get into the analysis of Cam Bynum. Is he good? What does he do here? That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. It's the best place to find last-minute tickets. Gametime is the place to find your tickets, especially if you're trying to do like a spontaneous thing. This is a story I'm going to tell a lot here, which is like for the playoffs when you don't know where the game's going to be, when it's going to be, if it's going to be. And so you have to buy those tickets last minute just by the nature of the thing. And when they open, there's going to be windows where the resale market is wonky because exclusive access is there for season ticket holders or whatever. And Gametime helps you put all that together, navigate that market, and get ridiculous deals. You know, you'll always have that one guy that you know that always knows how exactly when to get the tickets and what websites to go to. Well, now you don't need that guy in the trench coat. That's what Gametime is for. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Judging safeties is hard. I learned a lot about safety, but not as much as I wanted to, but just enough to look at a couple of the top guys back in 2022. I wrote an article for Zone Coverage at the time about Kyle Hamilton and how he ran a 4.6 at the combine, but it was very clear that he was rangier than that would imply, and people were kind of sinking him too far, I thought Kyle Hamilton could have been a top 5, top 10 guy. And I was very right, by the way. I think it might have been the only draft take I nailed that year because that was the year I was doing the history doc and I was not putting the effort in, but I did get that one. But the point I'm trying to make is what I learned about safety in doing that is a lot about safety is making the right decisions and getting to where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And it's not just fitting in the alley versus the run or, screaming across the field to go break up a deep pass. It's about the way you drop. It's about the consistency and accuracy with which you drop. You got to be in the right place with the right leverage at the right time. Watching the coverage of the Vikings all year long, everybody had their moments where they made mistakes. But I feel as though, outside of Harrison Smith, I was looking at 24 as the guy who messed up one of the least often on the field. And that's not because he has a foolproof job by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, on the other side of the ball, we saw Sam Darnold take advantage of tons of tiny little mistakes by good safeties that turn into explosive plays. It's a high leverage job. You've got to be accurate. You've got to be consistent. And Cam Bynum is consistent like a veteran should be. And honestly, he was like that. I mean, he had that understanding even going back to his rookie year when it was Zimmer time. And he survived the Zimmer to Donatel to Flores thing that completely doomed Lewis Cine. But he survived it. Metellus thrived in it, right? But, sometimes that breaks a guy. And sometimes, a guy can figure it out. So Bynum, I guess the rudimentary way to put it, he knows what he's looking at. And that's so important and not to be taken for granted that you know what you're looking at. You did the tape study. You know what that route concept is. You know what it is when that route is stemming a certain way. What you don't get with Cam Bynum is a ton of play in the box. Everybody has to know everything. Cam Bynum does line up as an overhang defender, threatening to blitz, looking for a sack. He will do that. He'll rotate down. If we're doing Rip Liz stuff, he will rotate down into the box and be that safety, depending on if he ended up on the strong or the weak side or how the motions work. It's not really up to the defense. It's up to the offense and how your rules change that. But with Bynum, he's not gonna be a box player half the reps. He's a deep safety, a very pure, true safety. And he has just enough of the skill to be able to do what the Flores scheme requires you to do, which is play out of position sometimes and not be a disaster. So it works. But you're not going to be like Josh Metellus, who can do all of the things. And while Bynum is a much better cover player than Josh Metellus is, I don't think I'm on harsh ground saying that. There are a lot of things that Metellus does that Cam Bynum can't touch him doing. Different players, different skill sets, and using them differently is part of the skill of calling a defense. So, but I think the draw here again is consistency. And I'm going to probably bang this drum a lot. When you have a 14-win team that looked dominant at points in the season, that ranked won in the power rankings sometimes, and everyone was like, at least understood it. Like, the Vikings were a good team that fell apart at the end. And the idea of running that back is pretty attractive to me. And like, if you look at all 30 teams in the league right now that are eliminated, 30 of 32 are eliminated. If you're the Chiefs and the Eagles, of course, you're running it back, but you look at all 30. How many other of those teams are happier to run it back right now than we are? And you can't say, well, the Vikings fell apart in the playoffs. So did all of them. All of those teams experienced playoff disappointment. How many of those teams are happier to run it back than the Vikings? And especially in the back end of the safety room, that was so good, it forced corners off of the field that had starting experience. And a lot of that is the chemistry and just knowing where to be and when to go there. And, hitting that proper landmark, opening your hips the right way, squaring them off when you're supposed to, and going and making the play. And that's why he would be in the right place at the right time with the interceptions. That ain't no accident. Especially, the tips and overthrows, right? Tips and overthrows, got to have those. That's on purpose. That's something that they work on. So cerebrally, he has it. Athletically, that's never been an issue. He's got corner athleticism because he played more corner in college. And I would love to see him back for that reason. So here's where I'm at. I'm 100% in favor of bringing back Cam Bynum on a long-term deal. I fully understand that this is a business and that may not be possible, but I sure am wishing for it. With Harrison Smith, if he hangs him up, he hangs him up. If he comes back, I could see him coming back cheap. If he doesn't want to come back cheap and he still wants to come, make his money in this league because he's going to do one more year, okay, go be a Seahawk and we'll get our like weird jersey swap. It's fine. And we'll, bring in, a Justin Simmons or somebody like that, somebody else who had, who has that veteran experience. But in this system, with how delicate things can be on the back end, I don't think I'm a big fan of letting the old guys walk and replacing them with like day one rookies, like day one starting rookies. I'll never hate a day two pick that, we're going to develop or anything like that's okay. Sure. Fine. But that's a long-term solution. The short-term solution has to have veteran experience. I think you just have to. So you're spending money at safety one way or another. I think that's inevitable. You might as well spend it on the guy that you like and dance, the devil how to dance with, I guess. Which maybe a dancing metaphor is an appropriate way to close this one down. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.